Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Kendall Hilligus. Well, I keep saying that. My name is Kendall Hilligus regardless of whether you're new here or not, but if you're new here, welcome. I am a full-time freelance illustrator working mostly in the commercial sector. So I do a lot of stuff for newspapers, magazines, brands, packaging, greeting cards, that sort of thing. And the longer I have been a freelancer, and it's been several years now, and the busier I have gotten, the more and more important it has been for me to have the skill of being able to manage and work on larger projects, projects that span over several weeks and months, and even multiple projects at once. So this is going to be kind of a productivity video. Productivity seems to be a really popular topic. It's certainly a common question that you guys bring up, but it's such a big one. So I figured today we would dive into a very kind of specific little slice of it. And I'm excited to talk about this particular slice with you guys because this is not something I felt like I was really naturally good at. I'm not a really super naturally organized and structured person. It was always a challenge for me growing up. It was a challenge for me in school. And it's only something I have learned and have become more experienced with, and have become like actually very structured, like hyper structured in some ways, because that's the only way that I can do it. And that's the only way that I can kind of keep myself on track. So I'm gonna go over my kind of top 10 tips for how I do that, how I stay on track and stay organized and be productive and all that with when I'm working on these larger projects or working on multiple projects at once. So it's a lot to get through, so I'm gonna try to just dive right in and unpack them step by step. All right, so the first tip is to break your process down into steps. This is very basic and you may already be doing this, but if you are in that earlier part of your career and maybe you haven't done any of these larger projects yet, but you have done several commissions or you're in the process of doing that, whatever, try to start paying attention to the steps that you go through with the creation of each piece. So for me, I know pretty reliably there's going to be like a foundational step when I'm negotiating with the client, doing the contract, doing all that behind the scenes stuff that's not very exciting. That's step number one. And then step number two is gathering the references. Sometimes that's something that the client does for me, but often it's something I still have to supplement. So foundation, gathering the references. Then I do the sketch, that's step number 3. Then I get the feedback from the client and I incorporate it, that's step number 4. Then I make the color, the full color version of the illustration, step number 5, and is by far the longest step for me. That's like 70% of my time that I will spend on any given project. Then step number 6 is getting feedback from the client and doing any of those final little changes. And step number 7 is formatting it, exporting it, getting it uploaded to Dropbox or whatever file delivery service I'm using. So those are the 7 steps that are involved in my process pretty much every time, regardless of what the project is. So if you don't know what those are for yourself yet, try to spend some time reflecting on that and identifying those 7 steps. And then tip number 2 is very much related to that, and that is to try to understand how long each of those steps takes you. So of course, you may not be able to say like, well, using my example, like the color phase always takes me, 5 hours, because there could be a much larger illustration that's going to take you 20 hours, or a much smaller one that's going to take you only 2 hours. But trying to understand proportionally how much time each of those phases takes up. Like I know that the color phase is always the longest. It doesn't matter what project it is, that is always the longest phase. So try to understand whatever your phases are. May not be 7, maybe more or less, but whatever your phases are, and then how long each of those phases, steps, we're gonna use the word phase for something else later, but how long each of those steps takes you. All right, tip number 3, if the project is really large, you wanna break it down not just into steps, but into phases. So a phase for me is what I consider a phase is doing all 7 of my steps for a certain batch of illustrations. So let's say I'm doing a project that has 20 illustrations. Maybe I'll break it down into 4 phases. So I do 5 illustrations in one phase, 5 in another, 5 in another, and 5 in another. So breaking the project down into phases rather than trying to do all 20 at once. That's something that is really common. And that may vary too, depending on that will vary depending on the field that you're in and your style of illustration. For me, I tend to put things in phases with like maybe anywhere from 5 to 7 illustrations per phase. But if you have a less detailed style, or you're working digital, or you're doing like vectors and icons and stuff like that, you may have more illustrations in a phase depending on your style and the project that you're working on. All right, tip number 4 is to group similar tasks together, certainly across individual projects, and maybe even when working on multiple different projects at once. So what I mean by this is, going back to our phase example where we're working on 5 illustrations, I wouldn't do like one illustration, then another, then another, then another. I would do all of the sketches, all of the feedback, all of the color, all of the final color feedback. I do each kind of thing all together at once. And that is something that I have found has really saved me a lot of mental space, because you can't make more time in your schedule, but you can get, well, I mean, maybe you can if you're someone else, but I'm also a mother of 2 young children, and working on lots of different things at once. So time is like a really pretty precious resource for me. So the way I have found to be more efficient with it is to group some of those similar things together, so that I don't waste time kind of shifting gears, both, mentally and practically. Maybe you've got your paint all spread out on your desk, and then you have to shift to doing something on your computer and editing. So you have to get all your paint cleaned up, and then you have to get your paint out again for another piece. It's common sense grouping those similar tasks together. All right, tip number 5 is to avoid rolling start dates. And what I mean by rolling start date is referring back to our example where we have a phase where there's 5 illustrations in a phase, 4 phases in the project. Maybe the client is getting ready, you're getting ready to start phase 1, and the client says, oh, we have the information, we have the references for 2 of those 5 illustrations. We'll just get you those, and then we'll get you the other ones in a couple of days. That seems very reasonable, and it's very common. I can say that scenario happens a lot to me, but it's something I really try to avoid, and I make it really clear to clients that in general, I do not start on a particular phase of a project until all of the stuff that I need from them is in. And the reason that's super important is kind of related to what we just said, the grouping similar tasks together, and then also it's just inevitable that it ends up affecting the timeline, and the things that got turned in later you had less time to work on. So maybe you're bumping out your delivery date, and then that affects the subsequent phases and any other project that you may have scheduled for a week or 2 weeks down the road. So really trying to avoid those rolling start dates as much as possible, and make sure all the client information gets turned in at once. All right, I think this is tip number 6. Meg will correct me if I'm wrong, but tip number 6 is to not commit to exact dates, delivery dates, working dates, timeline dates from a client until you have a commitment from them about when they're going to turn in their piece. So their components, our direction and the visual references. So let's say the client is going to turn those in on July 1st, and they've committed to that, and you know that a project is going to take you, however, 5, 10 days, whatever. When you have that firm date, you can give them firm dates. But if they have it's going to be, sometime in that first week of July, I would really try to avoid saying, okay, well, I'll be done by July 15th, because then you don't really have an ability to bump that out if you didn't have a clear date from a client. Whereas if they said, okay, well, we'll deliver by July 1st, we'll have our stuff by July 1st, and then they're 3 days late with their delivery, then you can bump your deadline by 3 days. So having that clarity about when a project starts or a phase starts and when it ends, when you're going to deliver, is super important. Our tip number 7 is to stagger your delivery deadlines. This tip is really specifically related to working on multiple projects at once, not just one single long project, but let's say you're working on 2 projects at once. Yes, I would advise grouping similar tasks. So for me, if I was doing that, and let's say I'm starting on something on a Monday and I'm working on both of these projects at once, I might try to have the sketches for one done Tuesday at noon and the sketches for the other one done or turned in Tuesday at 5. So that way, and then again, having the delivery deadlines from the client for their turning in their feedback then will be staggered as well. And that way, if you hopefully you're getting your feedback in 24 hours from when you delivered one, then you can have a few hours to work on the other. I feel like this is going to be super confusing. Basically, you're wanting to, yes, group similar tasks together, but with a little bit of overlap so that you have windows on either side to start getting the ball rolling with the other projects. So it's just like juggling. You're trying to kind of be as efficient as possible by grouping things together, but you also want to have that staggering, that buffering, so that you can keep multiple things in the air at once, keep multiple plates spinning, which that's a different metaphor analogy, but anyway, you get the idea. Try to stagger those delivery deadlines so that you have buffer in your schedule to work on other things. Tip number 8 is to be clear with the client about when they need to have their pieces turned in. And for my process, the client has their kind of initial stuff that they have to do, like the signing of the contract. Then they have to get me the art direction and the reference images, if applicable. And then they have 2 other times that they have to turn in feedback. So those are 4 different dates that I need things from the client, that the client has a responsibility. So there can be a tendency to focus on like what your deadline is and their expectations from you. But in order to meet that expectation, you also have expectations from the client and things that they need to do in order to deliver on time. And sometimes it feels a little bit awkward to say like, okay, well, your deadline, it feels awkward to give the client a deadline, but it's going to be more helpful in the end, and it will save you both a lot of headache if you're really clear and upfront about those things. So I try to have it in my initial communication in any sort of proposal. I try to have those dates as well in the contract, and then anytime I turn something in. So when I turn in my sketch, if I'm expecting, if our agreement has it that they're gonna give me the feedback by the following day at 5 p.m., then I will put a little reminder about that in the email. So basically looking for every opportunity to kindly and, with excellent customer service, to kindly remind the client of their deadlines and when they need to have things turned in. Because sometimes clients forget, and often, the art is the only thing that you're working on and it's your main priority, but they're often working on lots of other things. So it's easy for them to forget. So being clear with them about what your expectations are and how they can basically help you meet that deadline that they want you to meet. All right, tip number 9 is to have a la carte tasks kind of ready to go. So we've just been talking about like, what if you're working on a couple of different projects at once? This one I think would be true whether you're doing a couple different things at once or whether you're just doing like one larger project. But I like to have a list of tasks that I know, and some of them are like practical things, and some of them are just like, oh, here's a personal piece that I'm working on that's kind of midpoint and I could pick it up at any point and just keep working on it. Basically, I have this little list in my to-do list of things that I could cherry pick from when I find that I have an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, maybe even sometimes a day. Because even though we've been talking about how to, manage up and try to help the client get you their components, their pieces when you need them, that's great and that will help immensely. But if you work in commercial illustration, there will be a time when the client delivers late. Actually, there will be lots of times when the client gets you feedback late or gets you the reference material late, whatever their piece is that you're waiting on. It is not at all uncommon for it to come in anywhere from a few hours to a few days late. So being ready for that possibility so that you're not just like sitting on your hands waiting and feeling frustrated and like continually refreshing your email, having those things that you can dive into is going to make you more productive. And for me, it makes me less frustrated. It makes it feel less frustrated when I end up having a window of time now instead of being like, oh, why aren't they sending it in? Since I have it built into my contract that will mean that I can deliver a little bit later, I then feel more like I've gotten a gift, like it's a bonus. I have a few hours to work on something else that I wasn't expecting to. All right, so that moves us to the final tip, which is to plan and reserve time for other tasks. So this may not seem like it's specifically related to what we've been talking about. If you are in the phase of managing multiple different projects at once and working on larger projects, you will find that your time starts to get completely filled by all of those things, and you don't have natural little buffers anymore to do your admin, to do your social media, your marketing, your communication, all of those little kind of daily things, and especially like working on personal projects, those things can get bumped and pushed aside and pushed aside. And if you watch this channel regularly, you will know that that is the tip that I'm struggling with the most right now. These other ones, even though they weren't natural for me, I have gotten a lot of practice with them, and I feel pretty comfortable and familiar with doing those things now. But I am at a phase where I have been super busy, thankfully, super busy for a couple of years now without a lot of buffers in between. So I am constantly feeling like all of these other things, which are important, don't get done. They just get pushed to the bottom of the list, pushed to the bottom of the list, pushed to the bottom of the list. So I am trying to build in systems so that I don't do that. And yeah, I have not perfected it yet. And when I do get better at it, then I will certainly let you guys know. But I wanted to include it because it's an important aspect of being at the level in your career where you are working on these larger projects and managing multiple projects at once. So that is it for the 10 tips. I hope they were helpful. I'll have them in the description box below. Let me know if you have any questions about any of them, follow-up questions, or other questions related to productivity and organization for artists and illustrators. I am always happy to have video suggestions from you guys. And if you are an illustrator working in maybe a different style than me or a different industry than me, or even if you're in the same industry, the same style, include your tips for how you stay organized across multiple different projects, how you manage larger projects, and juggle multiple projects at the same time. Especially if you do have a different style, a different approach, I have a feeling you would have some different tips, and that could be really helpful for other folks. So thank you to Meg for editing this video. Thank you to you guys for watching it, especially if you've made it to the end of what I am sure is a relatively long one. Thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel and making this video possible, making it possible for me to hire Meg as a video editor. I appreciate all of you. And yeah, if you're new here, subscribe, like the video, go back and watch some of my other videos. I have a lot. I hope everybody has a great week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.